We continue now at the top of Daf Dalet Amud Aleph in Meseches Kidushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 4a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara is looking for the source that when a man is Mikadesh a Na'ara, that the money goes to the father of the Na'ara and not to the Na'ara herself. And the Gemara now returns to its original source, the source by Amo Ivriya, because by an Amo Ivriya, when she goes free, when she reaches maturity, so it says Ein Kesef, and the idea is there's no Kesef for her master, but there's Kesef for a different master, so to speak, and that refers to the father of this Nara. And the Gemara now explains how we know that the money is going to the father, because Yitzia Dechevasa Kamemayit, it makes sense that what's being excluded is what is similar to the case over there by Amo Ivriya. As Rashi explains, Yitzia Dechevasa Kamemayit, we're excluding something that's similar. Yitzias Erisin Dumya di Yitzias Amma, meaning when the Erisin happens, so that's similar to when the Amo Ivriya leaves the servitude Kamemayit. That's what the exclusion is, Midinama. That's what we're excluding by the case of the Amma, meaning to say as follows. Ulamemar di Yesh Kesef Ba, we're saying there's no Kesef by the Amma, but in a similar scenario, there is Kesef when it comes to the Erisin. Uma Yitzias Amo Ivriya Ein Kesef Lo'adon the Nafka Merashuse. Now when we say Ein Kesef by the Amo Ivriya who goes free, what we're saying is there's no money for the master, the one who she's leaving from. That's what the pasuk is saying. Af miyot di yesh kesef, so too the exclusion where there is money, meaning in the case by Erisin where we say there is money because the husband is giving over money to kadayik lietzias Erisin yesh kesef, because that's the whole inference that when she leaves her father's house for Erisin there is money. So that means similarly, lemishi yotza heimenu kamar, it means there is money for the one whom she's leaving from, meaning there is money for the father, v'hainu av, and that refers to the father, and so therefore it is from that source that we see that the father gets the money. But the Gemara continues, V'halo damya hayitzia lahayitzia, but the two yitziyas are not really similar. Hasam nafka la mirashus adun lagamri, because over there, when it comes to Amo Ivriya, she's leaving her master completely. V'hacha, but over here, akati mixura mesira l'chuppah, there is still something missing in terms of leaving the rishus of her father. She still has to have chuppah. We're talking only the stage of Erisin. We're not talking about a fully married woman. And the Gemara answers to that, B'hafaras nedarim miya nafka la mirashuse. When it comes to hafaras nedarim, in terms of who gets to annul her vows, in that sense, she is leaving his rishus. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Nara hamaorasa, when you have a Nara hamaorasa, avia ubala mefira nedareh, her father and her husband, they're made for her nedarim, they annul her vows, and in that sense, she is leaving his rishus. Rashi here explains, V'alo damya yitzias erisin liyitzias amma. They're not similar. The yitzias erisin is not similar to the yitzias amma. Ve'echi ko'amrit yitzias erisin asi lemute. How can you say that we're coming to exclude a case of erisin? Amo Ivriya, there's no money, but by erisin there is. Halav dechvasi, it's not similar. Dakati lo nafka mereshuse da'av l'maisi yodeh uli yerushasa. She still hasn't left the rishus of the father in terms of her earnings, or in terms of Yerusha, in terms of inheritance, ad shetikanis l'chuppah, until she enters chuppah. And the Gemara answers, B'hafaras nadar miya nafkalei mereshuse, in terms of annulling her vows, she has left her father's rishus, and the idea over here is not that the father is not involved in the annulment at all. However, she'eno yachol lahafer levado, he's not able to annul the vows by himself. That's what it means over here when it says Nara hamaorasa avia ubala mefir nadar. The father can no longer annul the vows by himself. It's her father together with her husband who annul her vows. But the Gemara continues, V'hai v'yotza chinam lahachi hu da'asas, the pasuk of v'yotza chinam really teaching us this chiddush, that again there is money in the case of Erisin that goes to her father. Hami boile l'chidatanya, don't we need the pasuk for the following brisa? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, v'yotza chinam, it says she goes free when she reaches adulthood, again talking about the Amo Ivriya. Elu Yimei Bagris. V'yatza Chinam teaches us that something happens when she becomes a Bogeris, in terms of going free. And Ein Kasaf, Elu Yimei Naris. And when it says Ein Kasaf, that's referring to the fact that when she becomes a Nara. And the Gemara will discuss if she's already going free when she becomes a Nara. So Bogeris, the stage of Bogeris is the stage of adulthood right after being a Nara. So what's happening at that time, that the Gemara will discuss. But in any case, this is what V'yatza Chinam is teaching us. So how can we use V'yatza Chinam to teach us that by Erisin, the father gets the money in terms of Kidushin? Amar Ravina says, Im kain le makra ein kasef. If so, the pasuk should have said ein kasef without a yud. Ma ein kasef. Why does it say ein kasef with a yud? So from that we learn ein kasef la'adon zeh. There's no money for this master. Aval yesh kasef la'adon acher. But there is money for another master. Meaning again by Erisin, the father receives the money of the Kidushin. Umani Yoav, and who is this master? Again, we're referring to the father. But the Gemara says, but how do we know that we make such a drasha? Meaning to say, how do we know that we can take a look at the word ein and darshan in this fashion? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, vizera einla. It says vizera einla. That's talking about a woman who's a bas kohen. So it says that if she marries a Yisrael and has children, so then she's no longer allowed to have truma. That's what it says, vizera einla, if there are no children. But if there are children, she cannot have truma. And we understand that to mean ein li ela zara. I only know her own children. Zera zara minayin. How do we know grandchildren also count in terms of not allowing her to have truma? Talmud lomar zera ein lo. It says zera ein lo, ayin lo. You have to look, you have to inspect. If you find any kind of child, even a grandchild, that is enough. V'ein li ela zera kosher. I only know if it's a kosher child. Zera apostle minayin. What if she has children but they are disqualified from a relationship that makes them disqualified? How do we know that? Talmud lomar zera ein lo. Again, the same pasuk. The pasuk says zera ein lo, ayin lo. You have to look upon it and find any kind of zera. But the Gemara says, "V'apiksei lezera zara." You already use the ein la ayin la drasha for grandchildren. So how can you also use it for zera apostle? And so the Gemara says, "You're right. Zera zara lo itzrich kra." Her grandchildren actually that doesn't even need a pasuk. Divnei bonim harein kibonim, because grandchildren are like children. Ki itzrich kra lezera apostle. So what's the pasuk needed for? It's needed for disqualified children. And the Gemara continues, Vitana Gufe Minole de Darshachi, but how does the Tana know? So we do have an example of darshaning, the Ein Law, Ayin Law, but how does the Tana know to darshan like that? Amri, because they say, Ksiv, it's written in the Psukim, Me'ein Bilam, it says Me'ein Bilam without a Yud, U'Me'ein Yavami, it says Me'ein Yavami without a Yud, Delo Ksiv Behu Yud, it doesn't have the letter Yud in those Eins, V'acha Ksiv Be Yud, and over here it has the letter Yud in the word Ein, Shma Mina L'Durasha Huda. So you see from that we can darshan the fact again that the word ein has a yud. That's how we're making the drasha. And the Gemara continues, v'itzrich lemichtav kidushel li'avia, v'itzrich lemichtav ma'aseh yodel li'avia. When it comes to this nara, the pasuk needs to tell us that her Kidushin goes to her father, and the pasuk also needs to tell us that her earnings go to her father. Because of rachmana kidushel li'avia, if it only said that her Kidushin goes to her father, Havamina Misham de lo tarchabu, I would say that's because she didn't work for that. Aval Maisi Yodet de tarchabu, but the earnings which she works for, Madidohav, I might say, goes to her. V'iyashmin and Maisi Yodet, and if I only learn this halacha by her earnings, that goes to her father, to come mitzunamine, that's because she is supported by him, so it makes sense that her earnings go to her father. Aval Kidusheba, when it comes to her Kidushin de Me'al Makasi, that's coming from the outside. The Me'al Makasi law that comes to her from the outside, Madidohav, I might think that does belong to her, so tzricha, so that's why both of the halachas are necessary. And Rashi explains, Ein kasef ela davar acher motzi. It's not money that takes the yamohevri out of servitude, but rather it's something else. Elu yimei narus. It refers to the fact that when she reaches the age of narus, that's when she goes free. Well, the Gemara later will ask, if she's leaving as a nara, so what are we mentioning bogeres for? Bogeres stage happens after being a nara. Ein kasef below yud k'dechsiv me'ein yavami, so we darshan, it could have said ein kasef without a yud, like me'ein yavami. Minolan de darshinon yud de ein ki agavna ban peinafshi. How do we know that we can darshan a yud like that? And Rashi continues, Zera ein la ein li she'akev al bas kohen milechol b'truma la zara mi-Yisrael. If a bas kohen, if she has any children from Yisrael, that stops her from eating truma. Zera zara minayin. How do we know that's true of grandchildren? Talmud lomar ein la ayin la. Again, we darshan from the pasuk ein la shemeis benam, meaning if her son dies, v'yesh lo ben, but that son had a son, afu makva, that also holds her back from having truma. Or zera apostle kagon mamzer. Let's say she has a mamzer. B'nei bonim hareim kebonim. Then the Gemara said grandchildren are like children. Nafkalam b'Meseches Yevamos b'Perak Habal Yevemto. We learned that out of Meseches Yevamos. V'tana guve minali damash malay ein below yud. But the Tana himself, how does the Tana know to darshan the word ein, because it could have been without a yud, and that comes from other psukim. Me'ein bilam, me'ein bedaito leilechimanu, the pasuk of me'ein bilam, again that has no yud. Ve'itzrich lemichtav ma'aseh yodel le'avia k'di yolef le'el me'es bito le'ama. We need to learn that the earnings go to her father. That we learned from the psukim earlier, to come mitzvah mineh, because she's supported by him. V'daite al ma'aseh yodel d'shchicha, and so therefore he's thinking to get her earnings since he supports her. The me'al makasila, but maybe when it comes to the Kidushin, which comes from outside, and he wasn't thinking to get money of Kidushin, and that's why he's supporting her. Maybe you would think that goes to her. And again, that's why we need both psukim to say that in both scenarios, the money goes to the father. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Gufa, returning to what we said above, V'yotza chinam elu yimei bagros. It says in the pasuk by Yomo Evriya, V'yotza chinam, she goes free. That means as a bogeres. Ein kasef, it says Ein kasef elu yimei naras. That means she goes free as a nara. And the Gemara asks, as Rashi mentioned above, V'lichtov rachmana naros v'lo boy bagros. Let the pasuk just say she goes free as a nara. You don't need to write anything about a bogeres. She's already free because she went free as a nara. Amar Rabba says, Bazeh v'limit al zeh. You need two psukim because one teaches what the other one means. Meaning, if it only had one pasuk, I would say bogeres. So it has to write two psukim to say that she goes free even as a nara. Midi dehavi atoshav v'sachir. We find a similar drasha by Toshav and Sachir, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa. Toshav, the pasuk says Toshav, it's talking about the fact that an Eved Ivri is not allowed to eat Truma if he's the Eved Ivri of a Kohen. And what is a Toshav? What kind of an Eved Ivri is that? Is that Konoi Kinyan Olam? That refers to an Eved Ivri who's acquired forever. That's the Eved Ivri we call a Nirtza, the one who gets his ear pierced and he's an Eved forever. And Sachir is that Konoi Kinyan Shanim. When it says Sachir in the pasuk, that refers to an Eved Ivri who was acquired just for 6 years. And so the Brisa asks, Yomar Toshav, v'lo Yomar Sachir. Just say that Toshav does not get Truma. You don't need to say anything about the Sachir. It's obvious. Vani Yomer, I could say as follows: Konoi Kinyan Olam Eino Ochel. If an Eved Ivri who's acquired forever doesn't eat Truma, Konoi Kinyan Shanim Lo Kol Shekain. If he's acquired only for 6 years, isn't that obvious? And the Brisa says, Ilu Kein Ha Yisi Omer Toshav Zeh Konoi Kinyan Shanim. A simple answer. If that were true, if it only said one, so I would say that the word Toshav refers to an Eved Ivri who's only acquired for 6 years. Aval Konoi Kinyan Olam Ochel. But I would think that if he's acquired forever, he does eat Truma. Ba Sachir v'limin al Toshav. The word Sachir comes and teaches us what Toshav means. Sha'afal Pisha Konoi Kinyan Olam. That even if he's acquired forever, Eino Ochel, he's not able to eat Truma. But the Gemara continues. Amar le Abaya. Abaya says to Rabba. Abaya says to him, "Mi dami." Can you really compare the two drashas, meaning the drash of Toshav and Sachir, and the drash we're making over here of V'yatza Chinam Ein Kasef about Bagras and Narus? Because over there, Trei Gufei Ninu. You're talking about two separate individuals. You're talking about the Eved Ivri who's an Eved forever, and you're talking about the Eved Ivri who's an Eved for 6 years. If we're talking about two separate individuals, T'chinami Kasav Rachmana Toshav. Even if the pasuk wrote Toshav, even if instead of writing Toshav, T'chinami Kasav Rachmana Toshav Nirtza Lo Yochal. Even if the pasuk wrote clearly that we're talking about a Nirtza, that the Nirtza does not eat Truma, V'hadr Kasav Idach, and then it even wrote the other halacha that a Sachir does not have Truma. Have a Sachir Milsa Da'asya V'kal V'chomer. So Sachir would be something that you could have learned out from a Kal V'chomer. We say if that individual, if he doesn't have Truma as a Nirtza, so certainly Sachir shouldn't have Truma. However, Milsa Da'asya V'kal V'chomer Tarach V'kasav Lakra. Sometimes something which can be learned from a Kal V'chomer, that you can write a pasuk about it. It's possible to say that. Meaning in this particular situation where they are two separate individuals, so then you could say one pasuk teaches what the other pasuk means, and the reason why you could say that is because even if that first pasuk was clear, and you didn't need the second pasuk to tell us what the first pasuk meant, but still sometimes the pasuk would write two psukim, because sometimes something that can be learned from a Kal V'chomer, the pasuk will write it anyway. That sometimes happens. Elahacha, but over here, Chad Gufahi, here we're talking about one individual who reaches Narus, and then later she reaches the stage of Bagras. So Kinavgala Benaris, now if she goes free as a Nara, Bagras my boy Gabe, what's she even doing by him as a Bogeris? Meaning it's not a Kal V'chomer, it's more than a Kal V'chomer. If she's already free as a Nara, she's obviously going to be free as a Bogeris. There's no reason, therefore, to write two psukim. You can't say Milsa Da'asi V'kal V'chomer. This is something that could have been learned from a Kal V'chomer, and sometimes the pasuk writes it. Over here, we would never need to write both halachas. Meaning to say, if you would just make it clear that we're talking about a Nara, and the pasuk certainly could just write the word Nara, it doesn't have to make a drasha that's difficult to understand. So if the pasuk would have made it clear that it's a Nara, there would be no need at all for the second pasuk. You can't even employ Mil Sadasi B'Kal V'chomer Tarach V'chasav Lakra, because it's even more than a Kal V'chomer. And so that's why Abaye is arguing you can't say that one phrase teaches what the other phrase means. That only works in a scenario where at least there would have been a reason to write two psukim, even if that reason is as weak of a reason as Mil Sadasi B'Kal V'chomer Tarach V'chasav Lakra. And so in any case, Abaye rejects Rabba's approach to understanding why we need two psukim over here. Elomar Abaye, rather Abaye says Lo Nitzrucha Ela Levagar the Islandess. The pasuk is needed for a case of a Bogeris who's an islandess, meaning to say you might have a woman who never reaches the stage of Nara because she never has the signs of maturity. She's an islandess. And so the pasuk is teaching us that she goes free when she reaches what we call a Bogeris. That's when she reaches the age of 20 years old. She reaches adulthood even though she has no simonim. I might think she leaves as a Nara. She doesn't leave as a Bogeris. If she doesn't have the signs of maturity of Naras, she never goes free. Kamash Malon, that's what the pasuk is saying, that if she's an islandess, she does go free as a Bogeris. Maskif la Marbar Ravashi, but Marbar Ravashi asks, V'lav kal v'chomer, but it should be obvious, isn't it a kal v'chomer? Uma simonim she'en motzian me'rishus av. If simonim, meaning to say when a woman reaches the stage of nara, when a girl reaches the stage as a nara, so those simonim, those signs of maturity, they don't take her out of the rishus of the father. The father still gets her earnings, but motzian me'rishus adon, but they do work to take her away from the master. She goes free as an amma ivriya. So bagros, so if she reaches the stage of bagros, shemotzia me'rishus av, where she's no longer, when she's a bogeres, she certainly is not in the rishus of the father. The father has no right to her earnings. Eino din shemotzia me'rishus adon. Isn't it obvious that should take her out from the rishus of the adon as an amma ivriya? And so it can't be the pasuk is teaching us bagros again. It is too obvious, even bagros to islandness. Elo amar mar bar Ravashi. So the Gemara says rather mar bar Ravashi says lo nitzrucha ela leikar zevina da islandness. The pasuk is needed to tell us that you can even sell an islandness in the first place. I might think that a girl who eventually brings forth the signs of maturity of naras, so that sale is a sale. It's an effective sale as an amo ivriya. But the loas is simon in aris. But maybe I would think a girl who never brings forth the simon in aris, maybe lo have a zvina. Maybe I would say that the sale in the first place is not considered a good sale. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Dalid Amud Beis.